Good morning, Tony. It's a bit of a marathon. Secretary Blinken left from Cyprus on Sunday for an unannounced trip to Iraq and landed at Baghdad International Airport, where he and other officials put on protective vests, boarded Blackhawks, and choppered to the Green Zone for a meeting with Iraqi Prime Minister al-Sudani. Now, Iraq is one of the hotspots the administration is concerned could see further violence from militias aligned with Iran, as it tries to keep this conflict from spiraling into a larger regional war. Already, defense officials say they're seeing increased rocket attacks against U.S. installations in Syria and Iraq.
It was very important to send a very clear message to anyone who might seek to take advantage of the conflict in Gaza to threaten our personnel here or anywhere else in the region. Don't do it.
So let me show you another aspect of the war that you are not hearing a lot about on mainstream media. And this is what the Iranian foreign minister was referring to when he told the Americans at the UN, when he threatened them, if you want to manage the genocide in Gaza, you're not going to be spared. You'll hear it from the Pentagon themselves in a moment. The Americans and their bases in Iraq and Syria, which I'll remind you again, these are illegal bases. Nobody in Iraq and Syria asked for these bases. The ones in Syria, the Americans are using to steal oil. You know, they just so happen to be built and located exactly on top of the oil fields. And we have seen, I mean, the Americans don't even bother hiding this. They just, like, in broad daylight, they were convoy after convoy stealing oil. So these bases are coming under attack. They've been attacked dozens of times since October 7th. They have been attacked before in the past by the resistance, but now the resistance have stepped this up to signal to the Americans that, we're not okay with this genocide in Gaza. We're going to put pressure on you until you put pressure on the Israelis. Now, of course, the mainstream media and these cows who call themselves reporters, the only thing they know how to say is, oh, it's Iran-backed militias. No, that's not how you talk about this. These are resistance groups who also have Iranian backing, but they weren't just, put together like a bunch of mold soldiers and sent there. These are Iraqis. These are Syrians. These are people who actually come from the countries that the U.S. is occupying, and they don't want Americans stealing their oil and stealing their land. It's very simple. It's not difficult to understand. So listen to the Pentagon spokesperson.
We tell you that between October 17 and 26, U.S. and coalition forces have been attacked at least 12 separate times in Iraq, 4 separate times in Syria, by a mix of one-way attack drones and rockets. Again, we will continue to revise those numbers as new information comes in.
The number of wounded soldiers, 21 U.S. soldiers. And it's funny because one of the reporters asks him, do any of them have TBI, so traumatic brain injuries, which was what happened in Ain al-Assad base when the Iranians hit it after Trump assassinated Soleimani. So the bases that are being hit right now in Iraq and Syria, you have the U.S. base at Conoco, which is an oil field in Syria. They've also been hitting Al-Shaddadi, which is another U.S. base. They've been hitting the American air base in Erbil, so that's in the Kurdish areas of Iraq. And then they've been hitting also Ain al-Assad, as I mentioned. That's another U.S. base in Iraq. I believe that just like the Israelis, the Americans are hiding there and minimizing the number of casualties because it's embarrassing. Also, people would be wondering, well, why do we have bases there, right? Since this is not often talked about. The Israelis, meanwhile, again, when we say Israel and America, there's no point really differentiating. It's the same bloody thing. Just like with the UK, it's the same bloody thing. So the Israelis, though, the Israeli branch of the US empire, bombed Syria again. Now, you might be losing count, which I wouldn't blame you for. Just to explain. In Syria, you have 2 main airports. These are civilian international airports. You want to go to Syria, you have to fly through them. You have to go to either Aleppo, if you're going to Aleppo, and then sometimes the planes going to Damascus will also fly through Aleppo. So Aleppo's the largest city in Syria, but the capital is Damascus. And both of these airports have been hit by the Israelis multiple times in the last 2 weeks. As a matter of fact, Israel has bombed the Aleppo airport specifically 4 times in less than 2 weeks. So here they say U.S. fighter jets launched airstrikes on 2 locations in eastern Syria linked to the IRGC. And this is a good way to hide that these are resistance groups, because when you say resistance, this legitimizes the groups. And then people ask, well, what are they resisting? Oh, there are Americans who have invaded their country. Yes, that makes sense why they're resisting. And then they don't think about Iran. But if you want to make them into boogeymen, you want to vilify them, you want to make the resistance look illegitimate and sound like it's something foreign when it's actually the complete opposite. And you, the American troops, you are the invaders and foreigners, not the resistance. Then you do this. You use this kind of language where you say these are groups and locations linked to the IRGC. When there's not a single Iranian among their ranks. These are Syrians and Iraqis fighting in that. Just like in Hezbollah, you have Lebanese people that are fighting against Israeli and American occupation. And yes, they also have support from Iran. That doesn't make them Iranian. Because if it does, then, as I said, we can just say Israel, is the United States Marine Corps. I mean, So anyway, they say this was in retaliation for a slew of drone and missile attacks against U.S. bases and personnel. No, it wasn't. The ones retaliating are the resistance. You see how they reverse the order, and this is the same propaganda they've been doing with Israel. They speak about things as if, history began on October 7th. Hamas attacked and Israel responded. Israel retaliated. The resistance in Iraq and Syria attacked the Americans, the poor Americans, and then the United States responded. The United States defended itself. Dude, when you invade somebody's country, you can't fucking defend yourself because you're the aggressor. Do you understand this? It's really not difficult. The same thing goes for the Israelis. These are settlers from Europe. They're not from Palestine. They are not from Palestine. They cannot talk about self-defense. You can't defend yourself when you attacked. Do you understand this? If there is a so-called ground invasion, and the Israelis have tried multiple times, Hezbollah will get involved, and these bases, the oil fields that are occupied by the Americans, these bases there will cease to exist. So, if they think these are rocket and drone attacks, I mean, they haven't seen anything. Let me show you what our dear chief propagandist John Kirby decided to say.
Now, we've also seen over the course of the last few days, actually the course of the last week, but certainly over the last couple of days of the weekend, an uptick in rocket and drone attacks by Iranian-backed proxy groups against military bases housing U.S. personnel in Iraq and Syria. And we're deeply concerned about the potential for any significant escalation of these attacks in the days ahead.
I have a suggestion. You could just leave. You could just go home.
Direction of President Biden, the Secretary of Defense has ordered the military to take steps to prepare for this to ensure that we're postured appropriately, both in terms of being able to defend our forces and respond decisively as needed.
So you understand now why they sent the aircraft carrier. The aircraft carrier, the USS Gerald Ford, and the British aircraft carriers, well, these were sent not to posture, play the tough guy against Hamas. They were sent to do it against the resistance groups and Iran. So they have to hide that. Another thing, there's an Israeli base in Eritrea that was hit yesterday as well. Okay, again, look at the map, how far away we're talking. Look at this. This was on an island, okay? I think it was Darhak. So this is in Dahlak in Eritrea. Look how far away this is, okay? This is basically right opposite Yemen, okay, where you also have the resistance. Yemen the other day fired several drones and rockets at the Israelis, okay, all the way up here. I mean, that gives you an idea how sophisticated and advanced their equipment is, right? Because once again, these are Yemenis that have been fighting against the Saudi coalition, but they have been given not just political but also military support by the Iranians. What happened is the Americans shot down these missiles. The Saudis also shot down these missiles because some of the equipment that the Americans have is stationed and based in Saudi Arabia. And Egypt also beefed up its defenses, which I find this despicable that Saudi Arabia and Egypt would work against Yemen and for America and Israel basically by doing this. When Egyptians are beefing up their defenses, they're doing that to shoot down any future rockets and drones and missiles that are coming out of Yemen. That's what it's for. The old Egypt, 50 years ago, 60, 70 years ago, would never stand for this shit and would be helping the Palestinians now. But, So, again, look at what we're talking about, right? The Halak is here. This is the island chain so in the Red Sea, okay? And an Israeli base was hit there just last night. So you are seeing in Eritrea, in Yemen, in Lebanon, in Syria, in Iraq, American and Israeli interests being targeted in response to what is happening in Gaza. The point here I just wanted to make to you is that Israel is looking really tough, killing, butchering civilians in Gaza, but they're actually suffering huge losses and being humiliated like the Americans on the other fronts in this war. And that's why you're not hearing about them in the news. Regarding the situation of the resistance fighting against the Israelis and the Americans have sent 900 troops now extra to the Middle East. So I'm not talking about to Palestine. I'm talking about to deal with the resistance, lobbing rockets and drones at their bases. Okay, so once again, this is part of the posturing. It's not just the aircraft carriers. They've also sent 900 troops. Maybe they need more help lifting the oil that they're stealing in Syria. I don't know what it is. They need extra hands to drive. But it's not going to help them.